the road that leads to nowhere. Where do the lost travelers go? In the heart of the ancient Zuhali Forest, where baobab trees reach for stars and shadows dance on moonless nights, lies a road. The elders of Mabazi village call it Njia, Roho Zilizopotea, the road of lost souls. They say it begins where 3 rivers meet, stretching into the densest part of the forest where even the bravest hunters dare not venture. This is the story of Adisa, a young woman who did not believe in old tales. And what became of her when she discovered the truth that hides at the end of the road that leads to nowhere. The skeptics' challenge Adisa had always been different. While other children listened wide-eyed to grandmother Zakia's stories about spirits and haunted places, Adisa would fold her arms and roll her eyes. These are just stories to keep children from wandering into the forest, she would say. There is no magic road that swallows travelers. Even as she grew into a strong-willed young woman of 20 summers, Adisa maintained her disbelief. She had become a skilled tracker, often bringing back more game than the men of the village. Her success made the elders uncomfortable. A woman should not be so bold, they whispered. But her father, Chief Kibwa, was proud of his daughter's fearless spirit. One evening, as the village gathered around the communal fire, Grandmother Zakia began the familiar tale of the road. When the moon hides her face completely, the old woman's voice crackled. The road appears to those with doubt in their hearts. It calls to them with whispers of adventure, but those who follow it never return to tell what they found. Then how do you know it exists? Adisa challenged. Grandmother Zakia's milky eyes seem to pierce through Adisa, because I have seen them leave, child. And I have heard their screams echo from the forest when the darkness takes them. Laughter erupted from Adisa's throat. I have tracked every part of the Zuhali Forest. There is no magic road. Then perhaps the old woman said slowly, you would be willing to prove your words when the new moon comes in 3 days' time? All eyes turned to Adisa. She felt the weight of their stares but refused to bend. I will go to where the 3 rivers meet on the night of the new moon, she declared. And I will return with proof that your road is nothing but a myth. Preparations and warnings for the next 3 days, Adisa prepared for her journey. As word spread of her challenge, villagers came with pleas and warnings. On the morning of the 3rd day, Kofi, the medicine man's son and her childhood friend, pressed something into her palm, a small leather pouch on a cord. Do not do this, Adisa, he whispered. Some beliefs exist for a reason. I'm not afraid of shadows and stories, she replied. Then wear this. It contains sacred herbs and my father's strongest protection charms. Adisa slipped the cord around her neck for your peace of mind. As the sun began its descent that evening, her father approached. Remember, he said, the true strength of a warrior is knowing when to turn back. Adisa embraced him fiercely. I will return before the morning sun, and these old fears will finally be put to rest. With those words, she walked toward the forest, the eyes of every villager following until the trees swallowed her silhouette. The 3 rivers meeting the forest changed as night fell. Familiar sounds became strange. Friendly shadows transformed into lurking figures. Adisa followed the sound of rushing water until she reached where the 3 rivers, Zima, Reedy, and Giza, converged. The moon had completely disappeared, leaving only stars to pierce the velvet darkness. Adisa sat on a boulder overlooking the rivers, waiting for the road that didn't exist. Hours passed. Nothing unusual occurred. Just as I thought, she murmured. But as midnight approached, the atmosphere changed. The air grew heavier. The chorus of night insects fell silent. Even the rivers seemed to quiet their roar. That's when she noticed it. A strange red glow emanating from the ground across the rivers. As she watched, incredulous, the glow intensified, spreading until it formed a distinct path cutting through the forest where no path had been before. The road of lost souls had appeared. Impossible, she whispered, but her eyes could not deny what they saw. Against her better judgment, Adisa found herself crossing the rivers, drawn toward the glowing path. Up close, she could see that the red light came from small, strange flowers that pulsed like heartbeats along the edges of the dirt road. Logic told her to turn back, but something stronger pulled at her. Curiosity, pride, and a desire to know what lay at the end of this impossible road. Taking a deep breath, Adisa stepped onto the glowing path. The journey begins the moment her foot touched the road. The forest around her changed. The trees seemed to lean inward, their branches reaching down like grasping hands. The air became colder, carrying whispers that sounded almost like words. Adisa! Join us, Adisa! She spun around, knife drawn. Who's there? Only the wind answered, but she could have sworn it chuckled. The road twisted and turned in impossible ways. After what felt like hours, Adisa noticed shapes moving among the trees. Dark figures that stayed just beyond the road's red glow. Show yourselves, she demanded, but the figures remained in the shadows. The protective pouch against her chest grew warm. Perhaps Kofi's charms were keeping these watchers at bay. As she rounded another bend, Adisa froze. In the middle of the path stood a child, no more than 7 years old, wearing the traditional clothes of her village from many generations past. Hello, Adisa called cautiously. Are you lost? The child looked up, and Adisa staggered back. Where eyes should have been, there were only empty, dark sockets, yet somehow they seemed to fix directly on her. Not lost, the child said in a voice too old for its small body. Found, like all who walk this road. Before Adisa could respond, the child vanished. Simply there one moment and gone the next. Heart pounding, Adisa looked over her shoulder. The road behind her had changed. It no longer led back to the 3 rivers. The only way was forward, the village of shadows. The road eventually opened into a clearing where a village stood, a perfect mirror of Mapazi. Except everything was wrong. The huts were constructed of bones. The central fire pit burned with green flames that gave no warmth. And the villagers, they moved like people but were composed of living shadow, their features constantly shifting. Some seemed to recognize Adisa, approaching her with outstretched arms and calling her name in hollow voices. Welcome home, daughter, said one that resembled her father in height, but its face was a swirling void. You're not my father, Adisa said, backing away. Not yet, replied the shadow, its voice like stones grinding together. But soon you will join our family. Adisa turned to run, but found her path blocked by more shadow people. They began to circle her, their arms extending impossibly long, reaching for her with fingers that stretched into claws. In desperation, she yanked the protective pouch from around her neck and threw it into the green fire. The flames exploded upward with a blinding flash. The shadow people recoiled, their forms momentarily disrupted. Seizing her chance, Adisa sprinted back to the road. The howls of the shadow people echoing behind her. The cemetery of dreams, the road narrowed as Adisa ran. The red flowers along its edge growing taller until they formed walls on either side. Eventually, the flower walls receded, and Adisa found herself in a vast open space filled with what appeared to be statues. Approaching cautiously, she realized they weren't statues at all, but people frozen in postures of terror, their faces contorted in silent screams. Moving between them, Adisa recognized faces. There was Jabali, a hunter who had disappeared 3 seasons ago, and there stood Zuri, a young woman who had wandered into the forest during a fever dream last rainy season. A plaque made of black stone stood in the center. Carved into it were words in an ancient script that, impossibly, Adisa could read. Here lie the dreamers who sought the truth. Their bodies return to dust in your world, while their spirits remain forever caught between heartbeats in ours. With horrified understanding, Adisa realized these weren't physical bodies, but captured souls. The road didn't lead nowhere. It led to a place between worlds where spirits could be harvested and kept. As this realization dawned, the frozen figures began to move, slowly turning their heads toward her, their glazed eyes fixing on her face, their frozen lips beginning to whisper her name. Adisa, help us! Join us! She backed away, but her heel caught on something soft. Turning, she found herself face to face with a fresh statue, one still in the process of formation. The misty shape was coalescing into a familiar form, her own. The guardian of the road, Adisa, ran blindly, crashing through the strange landscape. She burst into another clearing and skidded to a halt. Before her stood a massive baobab tree unlike any she had ever seen. Its trunk was twisted into the shape of a hunched human figure. At its base sat an ancient woman, so old her skin had the texture of tree bark. With a jolt, Adisa recognized her. Grandmother Zakia. Not quite, the woman replied. I am the original Zakia, the one your village grandmother was named after. I am the guardian of the road. What is this place? Adisa demanded. What happens to the travelers who come here? The guardian laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. They become part of our world. Their doubts and fears feed the road, keep it strong, allow it to appear when needed. When needed for what? To maintain balance. Your world takes from ours through your rituals, your prayers, your magic. This road is how we take back. She gestured to the massive baobab. This is the ancestor tree. The first humans grew from its branches before climbing down to populate your world. It requires nourishment, the spiritual essence of those who deny the old ways. I will not become food for your tree, Adisa said, gripping her knife. The guardian's smile widened impossibly. You have no choice. But because you are stronger than most, I offer you a choice. Join us willingly as a new guardian, or join the others in the Garden of Souls. The choice and the climb, what if I choose neither? Adisa asked boldly. What if I choose to return home? The guardian's eyes narrowed. Impossible. The road claims all who walk it. But has anyone ever truly challenged that claim? Adisa pressed. Uncertainty flickered across the guardian's ancient face. There is a trial, one that no human has ever survived. Tell me, The guardian pointed to the ancestor tree. You must climb to the highest branch and retrieve a seed from the crown. Then you must plant it where the 3 rivers meet in your world. If the seed takes root, a new road will form, one leading from our world to yours. And if I succeed, then you may return. But know this, no human can touch the ancestor tree's bark without becoming part of it. Adisa looked at her knife, a blade passed down through generations, blessed by medicine men and women. She tore her tunic into strips, wrapping them around her hands and feet. What are you doing? The guardian demanded, her amusement turning to concern. Without answering, Adisa plunged her knife deep into the trunk of the ancestor tree. It shuddered, a moan escaping from the wound. Before the bark could heal, Adisa pulled herself up, using the knife as a handhold. Stop her! The guardian shrieked, but Adisa was already climbing, stabbing her blade into the tree again and again, creating footholds as she ascended. The tree fought back. Branches whipped toward her. Faces formed in the bark, mouths opening to bite at her protected limbs. The voices grew louder, cursing her in ancient tongues. After what seemed like hours, she reached the crown. Among the highest leaves, she found what she sought. Seeds the size of her fist, glowing with red light. As she reached for one, the branch beneath her feet suddenly withdrew, leaving her dangling by one hand. With a desperate lunge, she grabbed a seed and stuffed it into her mouth for safekeeping. Then, looking down at the dizzying drop below, she made a decision. Adisa pulled her knife free and fell. The return as she plummeted, Adisa saw the guardian's face transform from triumph to horror. Just before she would have been dashed against the ground, Adisa called out ancient words that Kofi's father had taught her. The air around her solidified, cushioning her fall. She landed hard but alive, the seed still clutched safely in her mouth. The guardian lunged for her, fingers extending into claws, but Adisa was faster. She spat the seed into her hand and slashed at the guardian with her knife. The blade cut through the ancient being's arm, revealing not blood, but thousands of tiny red flowers. You cannot escape! The guardian howled, her form shifting between woman and tree. The road only leads deeper into our world, but Adisa had seen something during her climb from the tree's crown. She had glimpsed the 3 rivers. This world was a dark reflection of her own. She ran, the guardian's shrieks following her. The shadow people emerged from the forest, trying to block her path. But Adisa cut through them with her knife. Finally, she burst through the tree line and saw them, 3 dark rivers converging. Without hesitation, she dived into the churning waters. The current pulled her under immediately. The water was thick and cold, more like oil than water. She fought against the urge to breathe and swam with every ounce of her remaining strength. Just as her lungs were about to burst, her head broke the surface. But the air she gasped was different. Cleaner, not real. She had crossed back. The seed takes root dawn was breaking over the 3 rivers. Adisa dragged herself onto the shore, the seed still clutched in her hand. It pulsed weakly, its red glow fading in the growing light. With trembling hands, she dug a small hole at the exact spot where the rivers met and placed the seed inside. As she covered it with earth, she felt a presence behind her. Spinning around, knife raised, she found herself face to face with Grandmother Zakia. So, the old woman said softly, "You have returned." You knew what would happen, Adisa said. Grandmother Zakia nodded. I was there once, many years ago. I chose to return as you did. The Guardian said no one had ever succeeded. Adisa said, confused. The Guardian lies. Those who truly believe, who respect the spirits even as they challenge them, can find their way back. She pointed to where Adisa had planted the seed. A tiny red shoot emerged, grew rapidly into a sapling, then a small tree with glowing red flowers. But as the sun's rays touched the flowers, their color changed from red to golden yellow, their ominous glow transforming into warm light. What does it mean? Adisa asked. Grandmother Zakia smiled. It means you have changed the road. Instead of leading travelers to nowhere, it may now lead lost souls home. The storytellers promised when Adisa returned to the village, the people were amazed. Many had already begun mourning her. That night, at the communal fire, Adisa told her story. In the years that followed, Adisa became a storyteller like Grandmother Zakia. She would gather the children and tell them of the road of lost souls. But her story always ended differently than the tales of old. The road still appears when the moon hides her face, she would say, but now it offers a choice. Those who walk it with arrogance may never return. But those who walk it with respect and courage may find not only their way back, but also truths about themselves they never knew existed, and sometimes on moonless nights. Adisa would walk to where the three rivers meet and sit beneath the strange tree with golden flowers. Sometimes she thought she could hear whispers from the branches, not threatening, but grateful. The souls of travelers long lost, finally finding their way home thanks to the new road she had created. A road that led not to nowhere, but everywhere.